New Thought Media Network. We are a global broadcast network of positive music, media, and entertainment, inspiring humanity's evolution along the journey of enlightenment and creating a world of love, peace, empowerment, and prosperity for all. New Thought Media Network. Positively inspiring.
Free my mind, open my heart with the whispers of truth. To live a conscious life, to live a conscious life on the growing edge. On the growing edge.
And now, here's Allie.
Good morning and welcome to Growing Edge Live. We are presented by Satya. We are inspiring minds, healing hearts, and transforming lives. And I am Reverend Allie Benjamin, and it is my great honor and feeling really blessed to be here today. Every week, I look forward to this. And if you're here for the first time, welcome. So glad that you're here. And gosh, you're in for a treat today. I have a very special guest. She happens to be a good friend of mine, Beth Wheat, and you'll get to meet her in just a little while. And really, our show is for those that are wanting to hear the good news, because I interview people that are channeling their time, their talent, their energy, their resources, their love, their inspiration into doing good works in the world. And so we have conversations, we go deep, we talk about their spiritual journey and how their vision is materializing as their very life. So more about that coming up, but we always start with the segment called Ask Allie. And so I have a question here today from June. And June says, I've heard you talk about sovereignty. Can you talk about it more? So I thought, oh, yes, I do that, use that term quite frequently, but I want to look it up in the dictionary to see what the dictionary says about it. And then I will talk about what I call spiritual sovereignty. So the dictionary says supreme power or of authority, or the authority of a state to govern itself, a self-governing state of being. So spiritual sovereignty is that. It's all about having a sense of self, autonomy, having an understanding that it sort of awakens or happens naturally as individuals walk their spiritual path, as they do the inner work of clearing up any unforgiveness, of turning more towards the positive, keeping mastery over the mind, focusing on what it is one wants versus focusing on what's wrong. And so on the spiritual path, the self-discovery path, we begin to think there's certain things, habits, behaviors, ways of thinking and speaking that move us in a more positive direction, that seem to give us a more enriched, fulfilled life of meaning. And when we revert back to, let's say, negativity or feeling victimized, there seems to be sort of a not so good feeling. So as we start to more and more walk the spiritual path, start to develop spiritual practices such as meditation, maybe reading self-improvement or spiritual texts, or being involved with people that are doing things and being in particular ways that align with what you want, as we start to develop a life that is more in alignment with who we want to be and how we want to be, that the voice of the ego, the voice of that the victim, like something's happening to me, instead of the more enlightened view, something is happening for me, for my spiritual growth. So we start to more and more walk in that place of power, of autonomy, of understanding who we truly are. And this takes time. It takes meditation. It takes conversations with others that are on a similar path to you. It takes study, and it takes practice, and it takes time and consideration and contemplation. And all of this, and the discoveries that come from this kind of exploration, the self-worth that is gathered and embodied, the forgiveness that happens on the self and to those that we may feel have harmed us in the past, or we've taken things personally. As we start to do this inner healing, this forgiveness work, as we start to get a greater sense of who we are in the big picture as spiritual beings, having a human experience, but a very spiritual experience, we start to wake up to realize that we are sovereign, that we have the ability to govern our lives based on our own internal values, what's most important to us. And typically, it's things like peace and joy and compassion and love and empathy and creativity and wholeness. And as we start to integrate those and start to stand on that ground, that foundation of being, knowing who we truly are as divine ideas in the mind of the universe, we start to get a sense that no matter what's going on out there in the physical world, there's a deep, deep remembering sense of belonging and connection to our essential selves. So we have our egoic self, the surface mind, the part of us that moves through the world, our intellect. There's that part of us that keeps us safe. And then there's this higher mind, that part of us that knows it's always been safe, that knows that it's always belonged, that understands right timing, that everything's happening just, that there's a particular order in the universe. And when one has this higher awareness, greater self-awareness, has done the inner work, then this sense of sovereignty, of seeing what's going on in the outer world, and whilst it may impact us and our sensibilities, we're not letting it affect the way we think and the way we act. Those two things are still in alignment with our higher self, our essential self. So it becomes easier to have a sense of governing or mastery over our life, because we come from this place of confidence, inner spiritual confidence, that lets us not succumb to maybe requests that poke at our ego, that want us to try and prove ourselves or gain connection to people, or fearful that we're going to disappoint or upset someone. And we're mindful of those things in a sovereign state, but we don't let those things govern the way we make decisions. Having a sense of sovereignty is activating our true discernment over what direction to go, over what to say yes to and what to say no to. And it doesn't waver because we're at home within our spiritual identity as that great I am presence. And so having sovereignty in our lives, having a sense of self-worth and self-value, and having a clear understanding of what's most important to us, and be able to organize our thoughts, our emotions, and our actions in service of what's most important to us, gives us a sense of empowerment, gives us a sense of sovereignty, and gives us a sense of truly being comfortable, and more than comfortable, being grounded in ourselves, being in love with ourselves, having love for each and every person right where they are, even if you don't agree with them. There's a sense of empathy and compassion and love, unconditional love, agape love. And so, June, I hope this has helped you to understand what I'm talking about when I use that term sovereignty. And I trust that you find sovereignty in your decision making and in your relationships and in all that you do. So thanks for the great question. And if any of you have a question and would like us to talk about it here on Growing Edge Live, then please send it to, you see the email address there, growingedgelive@gmail.com, and we'll address it. So thank you very much. So moving on to our interview. Today, I'm so thrilled to be talking to my friend Beth. I've known Beth for over 20 years, well, probably over 30 years now. And we know each other in many different ways. I think we first met at a spiritual center we used to go to. And within that community, Beth was someone that we would have sing. She would be our guest music sometimes. And so I know Beth from singing. I also know Beth from, well, a lot to do with that spiritual community, but also within our greater community of Big Bear Lake, California. We knew each other as mothers. We were both mothers of children the same age. And so I would watch and see her interact with her children, and was so impressed by her gentleness, her commitment to her own values that showed up within her relationships that I would quietly witness from the sidelines. And then I saw Beth in productions. She's an actor. And so I would see her and even act alongside her once in Annie, Get Your Gun. Goodness me, that was a long time ago. My daughter Alex and I were in the chorus of that production, and that was a lot of fun. And so have seen her just give to the community through her acting and her directing and her producing within different organizations within the Big Bear Valley. And then I know Beth from working alongside her as I was a part of the Women of Wisdom, which was an amazing gathering of women. It was a retreat. It was several nights, several day long retreat where we would have, lots of speakers and activities and vendors and workshops and all kinds of things. And Beth helped us to build our mission and vision statement, which I don't even know if she remembers doing, but she probably does. And so many other ways. And then more recently, we have become friends. In my journey with grief, I turned to her, and she's been there to support me over the last few years. And we've always just been passing each other. Our lives have been sort of parallel to some degree, and then not. We moved away from California 20 years ago, so we haven't really lived in the same community other than a short couple of year period where I moved back for a time. And now here we are, and I'm doing this show, and I thought Beth would be such the perfect guest, because Beth, you really are someone that channels their time, talent, energy, resources, and love into everything you do. And so I want to welcome you today to Growing Edge Live, and to just give you a big virtual hug. Welcome, Beth.
Thank you so much. That was very fun to hear that overview of our long relationship, from your perspective, and brought back a lot of great memories And as you know, I consider you my guru, and I've always admired the grace and strength that you walk through the world with. And I love that we've been able to be friends and not just observing from a distance. It's taken its time, but it's been all in the right time and so wonderful. So thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's just such a pleasure. So our show is Growing Edge Live, and Growing Edge is really about evolution. It's about where we are now, and it also, in contemplating where we are now, we have to consider where we've come from. And so before we get into what you're doing in the world, where have you come from? What's your evolutionary journey been like? And we know each other from the spiritual center, but I don't know what your spiritual life was, as a child. And so can you share a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So I'm going to go back a couple of generations just to set the context. I was raised Catholic. My grandmother was orphaned at an early age, and she was placed in a convent to grow up. So for most of her childhood, that was the predominant influence. And it was a harsh one because it was a convent that used those children for labor. So when we were growing up, my grandmother took care of us because my mother, who was a professional musician, was gone a lot, physically and emotionally. So my grandmother stepped in to do the best she could, but she had this kind of really harsh existence that was all she knew and what she thought was the right thing to do. So she stopped going to Catholic church, but she took us and she would drop us off at the curb. And I can recall very vividly being very young. I think I was about 5 years old, because I can picture myself sitting on the pew and my feet stuck out because my legs weren't long enough to, for my knees to bend over the edge. So I was little. And I remember listening to the service thinking, what about the Buddhists? And what about, what about all the other people in the world that don't think this? And I have no idea why well, I do have an idea why, but it's odd that a child would have that. So by the time I was old enough to not have to keep going to Catholic church, I stopped, and I became a very science-based atheist, as a young woman. But I had this yearning. I had this great sense of wonder for the world, and the wonder and the science. There was a gap for me. And interestingly, I was asked to sing at the spiritual center. I had no idea what it was. I just thought, well, I'll learn some sacred songs, which I did do. And I think so those were my first choices, which didn't exactly fit what they were doing at the spiritual center, but I didn't know. And I sat listening to Reverend Jean Sweet, thinking this was what I was missing. She was quoting Ernest Holmes and many other New Thought, open at the top types of teachers for us, and it just exploded my mind. So since then, which that would have been in the early 90s, I've I've had peaks and valleys with my spirituality. I've had times when I thought, I got to go back to science. There's sometimes the mystery of all of this isn't enough. If we're yearning or we're really broken or cracked open for some reason, you reach and it just isn't there. But I've come to recognize that that's also part of the spiritual journey, those dark nights of the soul when you wander and you're lost. You're really not lost. And eventually, I just keep, sometimes it's gently coming back, sometimes it's a rude awakening, but my better angels always get my ear eventually.
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, I think the religions that we grow up with, or even if we're not really religious, I wasn't. My family I grew up in England, and there was sort of a mix of church and state. So we would have prayers at school and this and that, but a little bit of religious study that just seems more like fairy tale history or something like that. I didn't really have a clear understanding of what it all was. I kind of felt like out of the club, like everyone seemed to be getting this thing that was like, woo, not registering for me at all. And but nevertheless, whether we're religious or not, we're raised in a very Judeo-Christian culture that has us believing that there is some God out there that's, granting some wishes and not granting others. And so when we're in that dark night of the soul place, if we haven't done some soul searching, if you will, or we haven't, come to our own understanding of, who we are and what this is all about, then it can seem like, what's going on? Is God not here? If my child gets ill, or if my husband cheats, or my bank account is at zero, where's the good there? Like, what happened to God in all of these darker places? And so I think that a lot of people feel sort of victimized, maybe even if they don't realize, just because of this historical, importance that's been put on right and wrong, and falling from grace, and so yeah, it is an odd kind of reality to grow up not really religious, atheist maybe, and then be subjected to these same like cultural values of right and wrong, or and then what do you do when you feel like everything's fallen away and things aren't going your way, other than to beat yourself up and to fall into more sadness and self-pity, I guess. I think that's one of the great gifts that centers like the Bear Valley Center, and as I've seen and traveled around the country to other centers that fall under the New Thought umbrella, there's a message of help, hope, a message of responsibility, a message of, look wider, and find your own, connection with, who you are and what's happening to you in these peaks and valleys, and how to move forward with a sense of connection to something greater, but not a dependency, like this, beseeching, why is this happening to me? But a sense of, I've got everything I need within me, sort of like I was talking about with the sovereignty. I have everything within me that can help me move through this.
So true.
Yeah. So have there been times that what has been helpful for you when you've been in a dark night? What's got you to move forward and not succumb?
So, sometimes I think it's sheer stubbornness, the will to just push through. But I'll share a story that I was thinking about recently. I joined another group of women. That it's a small group of women, and we get together every Thursday morning via Zoom and do a meditation, and we read different books and things. And we were revisiting the Four Agreements, which is something that I strive to live by. It's a very challenging practice, but I've found that it really has worked miracles in my life. And so as we were preparing for discussing that book, I was looking for the book, and I came across a journal, and there were entries in from 2008, which was a really tough time for me and for a lot of people. You may recall that was kind of our big economic collapse. I was recently divorced. I was raising 2 teenage sons, trying to pay for all of their expenses, and at the time, I was teaching at the elementary school level, and I was a fairly new teacher. Teachers never really make a lot of money, but when you're new, you really, it's pretty low until you get some tenure. So I wasn't making a lot of money. I was just barely surviving, and then the market crashed, and I could barely make my too high house payment on a home that was worth half of what I was going to be paying for it if I were to keep holding on to it. So it was really a rock bottom time for me. And, my sons are amazing people, but at that time, they were individuating, and that's not always easy. They got into their share of, we had our share of challenges. So I found this journal, and I was journaling about all the struggle, and I was doing the right things in terms of what's recommended in the New Thought culture to visualize myself out of that situation. I had forgotten all about that. In 2008, I received an RFP for a proposal to do some culture work at Experian. And a friend of mine sent it to me, and she said, we're looking for this person to do some culture change work and visioning like I had done for Women Wisdom. And could you pitch this? And by the way, you're competing against KPMG and Deloitte, which are these huge consulting firms. So I sent in my pitch. They called me in. They gave me the gig, but then they said, why don't you just come to work for us? So I went back into the corporate world, and it was much better in terms of my for my finances. I was able to get it was right at the time after my youngest had graduated from Big Bear High School, so we were able to move away without disrupting that for him. And there were some things that were hard about untangling myself from Big Bear at that time, but I moved to Orange County. I worked for Experian for 12 years, and it changed my the resources that I had tremendously, and it turned out to be very good for my son to leave Big Bear at that time, and it helped me put them both through the training and schooling that they wanted. So it was like living proof for me to see where I was in 2008, what I did in terms of manifesting, through visioning and prayer and focus, and I hadn't really put all those dots together. So that was quite profound.
Yeah, it is. Well done to you. And, when you mention science of mind, and I know that Dr. Ernest Holmes always says this is a teaching that you have to put into practice and prove for yourself.
Yes.
Like, it's easy to read, the principles, but until you put it into practice and realize the power that we possess as individuals, and that's just your story is such a demonstration of that. And then how many years later to stumble across that journal and to put the pieces together and to see, we're about to take a break, but maybe when we get back, we can talk a little bit about, how you have manifested such an amazing life now, even from your experience to now. I mean, it's always been little seeds because of your visioning and because of you knowing what it takes to be clear about what you want. And so we'll be back in just a couple of minutes, and we'll talk more with Beth.
You are a gift. That is the absolute truth. You are a gift, a blessing to the world, a way that the infinite love of God shines itself, shares itself, and expresses itself more fully in the world. You are a gift and a blessing. Please take that seriously. Take it as your honor. Take it as your opportunity to be a light that shines for others. Be that bright light of God's love that's the truth of who you are, and enjoy it, because you deserve it.
I was made in the image. I was made in the image of love. I was made in the image. I was made in the image of love. Here and now I can see I was made beautifully. I was made in the image. I was made in the image of love.
We'd all stop acting like we're strangers if we could see underneath. We are one family, and it don't matter where you come from. Every heart beats to the rhythm of one love, one love, one love. Every heart beats to the rhythm of one love. Every heart beats to the rhythm of one. What if we could rise?
Here we are back with Beth. So, Beth, I'm sitting here thinking of all the amazing things that I've seen you manifest in your life. From Chirp, your store there for birds, the nature center in Big Bear Lake, to the groups that you've worked with acting. Like you mentioned, you were teaching there in the Valley. I know that you taught my daughter a little bit with voice lessons. So what are you up to now? You touched on the fact you were an executive for 12 plus years, I'm sure longer, but the more recent position you held. How have you managed to have such a rich, full life, not just kind of dabbling, but like you fully manifest the things that you put your heart and soul into? Like how have you done that?
Well, I don't, I definitely stumble, it's not like you write it down in your journal and it happens the next day. And I think that's something that is really key to think about. I recall the phrase, treat, then move your feet. So there is a lot of hard work that goes into it. And I have, I continue to work on myself because I still have insecurities and doubts, but things like that, discovering the journal experience, and seeing how I'd written out things that have now come to pass really helps. So I definitely recommend journaling. Also, a gratitude practice is huge because when you're wanting to create something for yourself, things don't always flow the way you think they're going to. So, for, I guess, as an example, one of the things that I'm really passionate about and committed to is doing whatever I can to help preserve our environment, to help preserve our natural world. I never envisioned that we would have a nature center, focused on supporting wild birds. And then even once we had it, it took me a while and it took me some other inputs to figure out how significant it actually was. And that's been really interesting. And my partner, my husband, Randy, and I have been building this business together. But there were some things, and you were influential, Allie, because you gave me the book Sacred Economics by Charles Eisenstein. So I had read that book, and I'd read a few other things that made me think we can do so much more with this business. We can become a model for sustainable retail. And so now we've written out a credo, and I'm just going to share, what our business is committed to. And we use this 4-way test now whenever we decide anything, whether it's purchasing products to sell or hiring people, what have you, that everything we do will be sustainable, meaning doing more with less, using resources efficiently. Things that translates to things like getting rid of all plastics in our store, for example. Everything we do will be equitable and inclusive. So honoring all living things, all of our customers, our environment, animals, every living creature, and our employees. We want our business to be awe-inspiring, because the sense of wonder is what does keep us in touch with how you manifest wonder and gratitude. And then there's a fiscal fitness. So we want to offer great value for our customers. We want to pay our employees well, profit sharing, all of those. And in order to do that, the business has to be disciplined in terms of how we spend and how we give. So it's just a small example of how many different things coalesce, and then setting out our values and setting out our commitment to that is something that we've just recently started to do, and we'll be doing more talks like this and getting into more depth. But we'd love for our business to be, as I said, a model for sustainability. So it's just interesting how I can say, that I'm manifesting things, but part of it has to do with also being open to what comes.
Yeah. Wow. So much. Yeah, so much, natural wisdom, so much common sense. And then to read an author like Charles Eisenstein and Sacred Economics, and to broaden the perspective, bring a sort of a spirituality into the foundation and the fundamentals of a business is evolutionary. To have profit sharing for your employees, and to think of how think of the Native American phrase of affecting 7 generations. Your model seems to speak to that, like small footprint, making a big impact, not just economically, but on people's hearts and minds. I can only imagine the ripple out effect that your nature center has on your community and beyond. Oh my gosh. I mean, I get goosebumps just thinking about, the chain of little synchronous events that occurred to make you and Randy be the perfect people to start a small business like this in Big Bear Lake. And just a little nod to Randy, who was the mayor, right? Is he still? Yeah.
Yes.
And so you guys together are just such a powerful couple, and to know it's so soul-centered, so consciously considered, all that you do. So how has that also moved into what you do as far as performing arts go in your community?
That's another of my great passions, and something else that I'm focusing on since I recently retired from Experian. And retiring is just not quite the right word. Thank you. The other focus that I've been concentrating on is to help grow the performing arts in Big Bear, and establish Big Bear as an arts and culture destination. So it's a place, for those of you that don't know about it, we're about 6,000 feet in the San Bernardino Mountains of Southern California. Living at altitude is magical. Ali knows the quality of the air, the quality of the light is it's very different, and it's very soulful and inspiring. And we're surrounded by these magnificent old wise pine trees and oaks. And it's a breathtaking place. And we're very, very grateful to be here. When artists come here, a lot of artists come here and stay, or they want to come here and have a retreat. And so we have this opportunity, I believe, to encourage more people to come here, because we are a tourism-based economy, to experience not just the forest, but the storytelling, the rich and beautiful storytelling, or even the magnificence of visual arts or textiles or things that people are inspired to create when they come here, and be much more purposeful about letting people know you can see an amazing strings concert here. You can see a play that makes you laugh until you cry, which we currently have running in our beautiful performing arts center. People think about coming here to ski and hike and bike and be on the lake, those are all wonderful things and very inspiring in their own right. But imagine if your mind and heart is cracked open by the beauty, and then you hear a fabulous story or you see a painting that touches your soul. There's more for people to come here and walk away changed. And so for me, storytelling in the form of books or poetry or theater, that really resonates with me. But there are many different mediums that will touch people's hearts. So we're working with our city government. We're working with our tourism board to plant the seeds of this vision, and then to begin to create festivals in our town that will attract people up for the purpose of this, for the purpose of exposure to arts, rather than just thinking of us as a more sports-oriented town, but keeping that element too, because that's great for our hearts and souls. So I've really begun that work, and it starts with, as we did before Allie Together with some of our visioning, it starts with planting the seeds of what it could be and doing a lot of conversations and socializing around that. And then, just seeing what sticks, seeing what people gravitate to, focusing on that, getting small wins. And then that's how you really make a discernible difference. And for me, it's all connected, because the arts tourism would also have a commitment to being green. So we would continue that have that sustainability thread, and it's all in the service of creating something very beautiful here that helps people get more in touch with their spiritual nature than they have in the past, if that makes sense.
Oh, absolutely. So what project are you working on currently? I don't know exactly, and I know that you were busy over the weekend because you were having to fill in for someone. So what are you actually doing?
So right now, this is our first full-scale production since COVID. And right now we've put up the one-act play that goes wrong. And some people might be familiar with it. The play that goes wrong is a 2-act play, and it's been on national tour lately.
I saw it in England.
You did?
Yeah,
Oh,
I
gosh.
did.
Did you like it?
It was great. It was hilarious.
Well, especially because you and Alex were on stage. So I think for theater people or anyone that's had the backstage experience somehow, it's even funnier and more rich because you can relate. There's always things that happen unexpectedly. And I just want to do a little bird walk, excuse the pun, really quickly. Last night we had we always do a call right before the show starts, and one of our backstage crew, who's a young woman, said, "This play reminds me how important it is to be in the flow." And she was talking about the actual play that the audience sees, because so much goes wrong, but also in theater, things that aren't supposed to go wrong go wrong. And I thought that was just so profound, because I know that's a big part of manifesting as well. As I said, stuff doesn't come to you in the way you thought that it would. So you have to be grateful, look at what came and why, and then go from there. So it's the one-act play that goes wrong, and it is there's probably 3 minutes in the beginning of exposition that is kind of quiet, and then after that, it is just one hilarious thing after another, and people have been coming to us saying, "I can't remember laughing that hard. I was laughing until I was crying, and I feel healed." I mean,
Wow.
without provocation, that's what many people have said to me in the lobby.
Wow. Oh
Yeah.
my gosh.
Yeah.
How rewarding it must be for
Yes.
you. Are you acting in it? Are you producing it? What's your role?
So I directed it without the intention of acting in it, and then one of our lead actors became ill, so I had to step into that role. So it was that's why I was telling you I had a pretty intense week. I had 2 days to learn all the lines,
God.
and this is the first time I've been on stage since pre-COVID, so that was I had to wake up some muscles I haven't used in a while, but it was very fun, and I'm so glad that I got to have that experience as well with the cast because there's a unique bonding between actors on stage. But fortunately, he's better now, and he'll be stepping back in for next weekend, and I can enjoy the show.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Somebody's asking what neck of the woods are you from? And Beth's from Big Bear Lake in Southern California, just outside of Los Angeles and kind of Palm Springs and Joshua Tree area. Beautiful area.
Yeah.
So I'm looking at the time. Oh my gosh, our conversation's going by so quickly. So what, we've just heard that someone said that it healed them. That's huge. And I'm sure those of you that are listening can relate to seeing a show, a live performance, or even a movie where you're seeing people play through particular scenarios that somehow shifts you inside, shifts your perspective, maybe gets you tuned into the humor that's kind of been buried that you haven't let bubble up, the joy that's there through humor, through looking at the human condition played out through these various roles and scenarios is transformative for many, and I'm sure for the actors, obviously for the actors themselves. So as you've been in this world of performing arts for so long and been a part of the same community for so long, meaning in general, Big Bear, the Big Bear Valley, how have you what have you picked up from others throughout the years, through comments, conversation, feedback about how they've been impacted by having performing arts in a community? How does it affect the elderly and the young? Like, what's your report, Miss Wheat?
Well, as I mentioned before, my mother was a musician, so she often worked on plays. This was back before any computerized music, so she worked on transforming scores, transpositioning musical scores, and things like that. She was quite accomplished. We always had a parade, literally, of entertainers coming into our home. Usually she would play in lounges and things like that. So it was after the bars closed, and we were trying to get sleep for school, and but she'd say, "Get up, this person's here, and you need to hear them sing." So I've been around theater and performing people for my whole life, and I think that what it does for an individual and for a collective. And I've been reading, actually, as I'm doing my research on this initiative that I have for Big Bear. When we come together, and it's very much like going to church, when human beings come together and they experience the same message, whether that's a sermon or a song or a play, there is something about the collective energy and what happens that is transformative. And not only that, there's new research that says that it's necessary. And so when you think about what happened during the pandemic, when we were not gathering in groups, this created a loss in us, and it's something that we can rightly grieve. And I think that's where people feel the healing is coming in from, because we're together again and we're laughing. I'm grateful we decided our first play should be a comedy and not something, hard hitting and dramatic, although those are wonderful too. But we know that collectively, when people when they experience art, whether it's watching a play, looking at a painting, listening to a concert, and in particular, interacting with it live, it's different. Movies are fabulous, but it's different, even in a movie theater. Um, it's that exchange of the being alive that makes a real difference. You see literally lower crime rates, lower suicide rates, higher test scores. And then when people actually participate in the arts, whether that's learning to play an instrument or paint or whatever, then those increased percentages go up exponentially. So I take that to mean that art is essential to our soul.
Mm, absolutely. Gosh. Yeah, you touched on so much, and I reflected on my own experience of not going to any live performances since COVID. And like I mentioned, I went to see um, the show that went wrong, or the play that went wrong in London last year, and then I just saw in London the Book of Mormon, which was the funniest thing I've ever seen in my life.
Oh,
But yeah, there was, both comedies, and both and my to the Book of Mormon I went with my two sisters and brother, without our spouses, and just us. And so yeah, gathering, coming together, enjoying, humor, or a drama, or a horror movie, or play, or it does something when you're there live, and it does something when you come with friends and have a shared experience of it. Um, Gosh, yeah, so much. Yeah, and I'm good at suggesting books, and there's a book I'm reading at the moment called The Art of Gathering
oh,
that you might want to know, because it's
yes.
really juicy. Is if you're into organizing gatherings and such, it's just a real little gem. Um, so I want to ask you what I always ask my guests at the end. What do you do to stay centered and grounded in your connection with, some people call it God, some people call it the flow, some people call it creativity, whatever it is? What do you do when you're off kilter? What do you do? What's your practice? What do you do to center yourself or ground yourself?
Well, I am still working on that. I'm not perfect, and I could still I could still be set off kilter by a comment or something, especially if it's someone who's meaningful to me. And when you put yourself out there in the world, you're going to have those experiences. And that's why I love the four agreements, because not taking things personally, not making any assumptions, being impeccable, which to me is just being integrity yourself. Because when you're not in integrity and you get a criticism, you have reason to doubt yourself. You may have misstepped. So making sure you're trying to be in integrity is so key. And that also includes always do your best. Those are the four agreements at the highest level. I find that those are very, very helpful to me, but I do still have transgressions. And I think that's where learning, having that ability to forgive yourself, and the way I've found for me to do that best is to go back to gratitude. Wait a minute, you're feeling sorry for yourself. What is that all about? But first, what are you grateful for? So go through all of that and then revisit whatever it was that took you off the path. That's kind of the shortcut of what I find is working for me the best right now.
Beautiful. Yeah, the four agreements. It's been around, ancient Toltec wisdom that's been shared with us through that amazing little book by Don Miguel Ruiz.
Mhm.
And so yeah, putting yourself out there in the public really is an interesting thing, because
It is.
people love to complain, And people love to point fingers, and people love to not follow those 4 agreements until they read it, and then they realize, oh, yeah.
Yes.
So is there any sort of pearl or nugget or growing edge wisdom that you would like to leave with our audience, as far as something that they can take away?
Well, first of all, I think being part of this group and joining these sessions is a tremendous opportunity to stay on that course. And I'm really grateful that you do this. I'm honored to be part of it because you have some incredibly amazing guests. But I think that having a discipline, whether you're following the 4 agreements or whether you're following, there's a great book. I don't know if you've read it, Allie, but it's The Virtues of a Philosopher Queen. And that goes back to Marcus Aurelius and Plato and Socrates. You know, there's ancient wisdom, so much ancient wisdom for us to draw from. Having a discipline of any kind is really what I think makes a huge difference. And having a gratitude practice, I just go back to those things. So
yeah, I think that gratitude and love, those 2 words, those 2 things, have a particular frequency that is palpable, but also magnetic. You know, love and gratitude are energies that draw and connect people and heal. And so, yeah, everything, I like to think of, you know, everything is centered in love and gratitude in my life. And just, you know, affirming that for myself every day is anchoring and connecting. You know, you talked about a spiritual, you know, have something. And for me, it's the Enneagram at the moment. I know it's been an ancient wisdom that has, you know, you dive into some sacred wisdom, and gosh, it just gives and gives and gives so many blessings. So thank you, Beth. Whether it's the 4 agreements, the Enneagram, going to a play, or even feeding the birds, I know that you'll feel a greater connection with life and with yourself. So thank you so much for being our guest today. And thank you for watching. We couldn't do this without you, our audience, and those that are watching, supporting us. We love you very much and send lots of blessings out. And next week, we have a surprise guest. It will be a surprise to me too, because it's yet to be determined. So thanks again, Beth, and thank you to New Thought Media Network, Robert, and we'll see you next Monday.
Please help us say thank you to our organizational sponsors, including the Hepperlin Foundation, Affiliated New Thought Network, International New Thought Alliance, Science of Mind Archives and Library Foundation, Center for Spiritual Living Denver, Center for Spiritual Living Midtown, New Thought Philadelphia, Planned Happiness Institute, Summit Center for Spiritual Living, One Heart Retreats, Center for Spiritual Living on the Lake, Unity Spiritual Center, Kitchener, Home Center for Spiritual Living, La Mesa, Satya Center, Center for Spiritual Living, North Jersey, Unity of Savannah, and Center for Spiritual Living, Seattle, as well as all of our individual donors. Thank you for making New Thought Media Network a place to be. Please come be you. And remember, like, share, and subscribe. New Thought Media Network, positively inspiring.